All right, good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon here on the East Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Choi. Thanks for watching Movers and Shakers Unlimited. And as you saw in the intro, perhaps you saw the promo, that I have a very special guest that I want to introduce today. So give me one moment so I can bring them on. So I want to introduce composer Sherri Chung. What's going on, Sherri? How you doing?
Brandon, how's it going? I forgot you were on the East Coast.
Yes. Just to give a quick intro to Sherri, I know she's going to probably be very modest about it, but she was recently, congratulations, by the way, recently put on Variety's, well, I guess it's been a couple of months now, but still, as of this year, Variety's 10 composers to watch. That is awesome stuff. You have seen her work in much of the Arrowverse. However, one of the main shows that, as you guys know, watching out there, that we will be talking about today is Batwoman. But before we get into that, Sherri, first off, how have you been? It's been, as I think we were talking a little bit about it off stage, but how have things been?
Things have been very good. Thank you, by the way, so much for having me, Brandon. It's been such a kind of a pleasure working with you in the past. So I'm super excited to be on here and just chat a little bit. Things are going well. I can't complain. I'm sort of on a natural hiatus from the shows. I tend to work in seasons, as it were. So so I worked through May, and then after that, I was on sort of like the same hiatus that I normally, have, I guess. I've been keeping a little bit busy, but I'm fortunate to know that the work is coming back. I know that the shows are going to pick up, starting filming. I think next month, so mid-September. So things are picking back up over here. It's very exciting.
Awesome stuff. So before we hop into Batwoman and all that entails, I wanted to, take the clock back a bit and talk about those earlier years in your career and the aspirations to get into music. So was it, I don't think it's funny, we don't think we've ever talked about this, but was the pathway of a composer always the goal, or was it perhaps like as a vocalist? Because I know you do that as well.
Yeah, for me, it was always like, I wanted to be a film composer. I was one of those kids that kind of like knew from an early age. So I didn't like fall into it. I was like, nope, I want to do that. And I'm going to go to school for this. And then I'm going to go to grad school for that. And then I'm going to, that kind of thing. So I kind of knew from the very beginning.
Awesome. And also looking back, I understand, and we need to talk about this further off stage as well, that you starting off, you provided your talents to Family Guy and American Dad. So can you talk a bit about that and providing your talents to that earlier in your career?
Yeah, so I came out to Hollywood to do the University of Southern California's scoring for motion picture and television program, the graduate degree in that. And then right at the tail end of that, Walter Murphy, who currently still composes Family Guy, American Dad, and at the time he was starting the Cleveland show. And he was like, I need an assistant. So I interviewed with him and we started working together, which was kind of like one of the highlights of just coming out here. I mean, the program was really terrific, and the people that I met were really great, and having those opportunities and just learning and all that. But getting a chance to do hands-on stuff, like hands-on training right from the very beginning, was like pretty much like, hitting, striking gold, as it were. So I was just starting out as as Walter's assistant, just doing sort of studio tasks, prepping Pro Tools sessions for his live recording sessions, tagging some of his library stuff, doing some MIDI prep, so all very like composer assistant types of things. Not a writing gig. Walter writes everything himself. Walter only takes on the number of projects that he can, just to make sure that he's writing everything. And I was with him through those shows, through the length of the Cleveland show, through TED 1 and 2. And I somewhere in there, I was able to start orchestrating for him. But I think the coolest thing was just getting to go to those live sessions at Fox for at least once a week, sometimes even twice a week. We were at Fox or Sony, maybe even Warner Brothers, but just because he was recording so much. And thank goodness to Seth MacFarlane, who like really, really believes in live musicians and live recording and kind of what that can bring to a score. And obviously all hail Walter Murphy, of course, who is just, such a badass when it comes to, I mean, big band instrumentation and orchestration, but just across the board. He's such a terrific composer and orchestrator. So to get to work with him and sort of, orchestrate alongside of him and alongside of his other main orchestrator was kind of like a huge thrill. And I think it taught me a lot just about working with live musicians and running a session and just watching Walter just kind of, be such a professional and such a, musician, the whole way through. So it kind of gave me a really good start to my career out here.
Outstanding. And to discuss, that transition further, as I said, we want to get into Batwoman. How did that segue into entering what we now know as the Arrowverse?
The great Arrowverse. Yeah. Well, since I know you've had Blake on here at least once, and not a couple times, and obviously Daniel, my colleagues Daniel and Nathan, Daniel Chan and Nathan Bloom, I know you've probably heard their stories, and obviously Blake has, can tell his story about how he started the Arrowverse. I came in at Supergirl. So I started working with him, writing for him officially on Supergirl. I had known Blake since USC. I met him there when he was teaching. He was an advisor at the Sundance Institute Film Music Program, which I had done in 2010. So that was a really great way to connect with him even more and get him to learn my music and vice versa. And I just really always admired him as a composer and just the way he approached scenes, the way he read them, and just, kind of his approach to writing music in general. And that always sort of resonated with me. So I really stayed in contact with him and kind of studied a lot of his stuff. And then I did become his vocalist at some point on a show called Resurrection, and then also vocalist on Arrow, just for a few key episodes. We did try and work together. We were trying to write songs together, and he was pitching us to work together on certain things that just, didn't pan out until Supergirl. And that was when he was, he and Greg Berlanti were extending the Arrowverse after Arrow and Flash. And Supergirl was kind of that next installment. And that's when I got the call, like the golden ticket call, when someone says, hey, I know your voice, not just your singing voice, but like your writing voice. And I think you'd be really great to help me with like this part, like developing part of the sound of this show. So it was definitely a collaboration from the beginning. It was still his show. It was still him taking the lead on that. He started the sound of Arrowverse, so I certainly would not have been able to just step in and be like, yeah, let me just take this over. So that was kind of how we started working together. And from there, I started writing with him along with Nathan Bloom, Daniel Chan. Obviously, we know that Blake and Daniel have since taken the show and moved it into this just amazing, sort of, what it is now. And I've gone, to move on to other shows. But that was the biggest start that got Blake and I working together, and me at the time sort of learning his style and learning how he does things. And I would call it kind of like a mentorship too. It wasn't, I guess I wasn't his assistant in that, certainly not the way I was with Walter, and I didn't orchestrate for him and stuff. But as an additional writer, as a composer, it's like you want to work at a level that's above you, as well as like where you kind of are. So I was still doing my own projects, short films, student films, indie films, like stuff like that. But you really want to sort of capitalize on those opportunities when you get to work with a composer who's further along in their career, and just has so much to offer and that wealth of information. So fast forward to Batwoman 2019. So last year was when we started. I'm wondering if we heard about it in 2018. I'm trying to do my math, but in any case, we heard about it, and by then Blake and I had actually we were doing Riverdale together. We had done Blind Spot together. We had both been asked to come together on a show called The Red Line, which was produced by Greg Berlanti and Ava DuVernay. That was a limited series on CBS. And so by that point, we were now like sort of getting asked to be the duo and kind of work on this show together. So when it came time for Batwoman, I think that became a next logical step Blake was like, let's do this together. You know, I think there were certain things that, we were trying to cover, like, obviously Batwoman is, a female superhero, much like, Supergirl. So I think it was kind of a natural progression for us to work together on that. So so from the very beginning, we've been developing the sound, but it does fit into Arrowverse. It's very different, as we all know. Like, each one of the shows have their own sound, but they're also connected in a way. So so of course when we do the crossovers, that somehow it's this crazy mashup of whatever, and Blake definitely takes point on that, because it's like, I don't. You need like one architect to kind of figure things out, and then the rest of us are like, yeah, and then we start adding, and then it becomes this full-on collaboration. But yeah, it's super fun. Batwoman is super fun. It's really great to work with Blake on it, and it is very much a collaboration. We both tend to sort of grab. I'm totally getting ahead of myself, so you can stop me if you want.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. We're gonna dig deep on each of those shows. So it's actually perfect. Actually, my question is, because you actually have been quoted as saying this, is just the theme of education and how that plays, or at least for you have designated that as a necessary theme in how you work in creating the necessary tools to do what you do. So, and speaking further to that, can you talk, and you touched on it a bit now, but how effective that has been, as you said, in kind of having a mentorship, so to speak, as you've been working within the Arrowverse, and the tools that you've been able to pull, like specific tools perhaps that you've been able to pull as you have branched off and worked on shows yourself.
Yeah, I mean, education, like, for me, the education started back with, like, I did my undergrad degree in composition and theory,
Sure.
graduate, and a lot of people don't go that way. I mean, I know many successful composers who didn't, like, go to school for music, and they sort of fell into it, and that's great. That's everybody's path. I think for me, but getting back to what you're saying about, like, the mentorship thing, I mean, I don't think Blake set out to ever do that. I mean, I know he, like, he taught at USC, but I don't think that was his, like, goal, to be a mentor to people. I know that he's always been sort of, has a calling, if you will, to at least be, instructive. He certainly has a knack for it. And I didn't go into it thinking, oh yes, I would like this person to mentor me. It was just, when you reach out to somebody that whose methods and practices and the way that they do things sort of resonate with you, you're like, oh, and you kind of keep asking them questions. And I've done that with other composers too. I've done that with Walter Murphy and other people too. So, but it is kind of great when it becomes a two-way street, where that person responds back to you, and all those people did respond too. But after a while, you realize, oh, I can actually form, like, a working relationship with this person, and then so I feel like that's been like really big for me. I mean, I don't really know the point at which I was being mentored, and then the point where I was like, it's kind of less of a mentorship now. Like, I don't really know. Like, okay, now I've graduated. It's
right.
I don't really know. I mean, it doesn't really, and I guess it doesn't really matter. But I think that all of us are learning from every project that we do, from every person that we come in contact with, even if they're not, even if we're maybe further ahead in our careers than, let's say, they are. Obviously, in the case of Blake, it's like, well, he's further ahead, and he'll always be further ahead. So I'll always probably have something that I can, like, learn from him, or questions I can ask him. But yeah, I think it's kind of cool how, I always think of, there's the education of things. There's, like, academic education, but then there's also applicable education.
Hands-on.
Yeah, right. Like, you have to learn on the job. You can't just read a textbook on how to score something, or read a scene, or even, like, work your way through this, software program or something. You kind of just have to get in and do it. So I kind of feel like, it just became a natural, sort of mentorship, but then also just turn into kind of collaboration when it's like, someone kind of gives you the reins and says, hey, you have an idea, or whatever. Like, if you have an idea, go for it and take it. And that's kind of what it's become. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's kind of just speaking towards that I was, sort of
definitely of I guess that delegation piece, and then eventually, knowing, okay, these are the tools that I provided you with. Go ahead, I fully trust, your choices in that regard. Go ahead, go off on your own and go ahead and knock it out. So you touched on Riverdale not too long ago, so I wanted to hop into that real quick before we go into Batwoman. Now with Riverdale, and shout out to Dan, because I actually had Dan Perrin on here a couple of shows ago. He's a major figure when it comes to Archie comics, and has had a huge impact on it. But with that being said, I talked with him about how it is that whole universe is branched out in other mediums, specifically in television. And can you talk to that in terms of something that iconic, and trying to find not only a voice that folks will respond to in its capacity on television, but also having your own voice within it as well?
Yeah, right. It's a weird thing. It's like, so far I've worked on a lot of things that already had this whole, like, mythology behind it, or had like a whole history behind it. Like, even when I did a film called Nancy Drew and the Hidden Staircase last year for Warner Brothers, and it was like the same kind of thing where it's like, oh my gosh, this comes with such a history and a fan following. And so my first instinct, I mean, this is pretty much just whenever I start any project, I just like vomit. I'm just like terrified. I'm just like, I can't do this. And then, I run the entire emotional landscape of like, this is going to be so fun. And like, I'm a failure. And it's like, oh my gosh, I did it, the whole thing. But especially I think when it comes to something like you're talking about that already comes with a fan following, it's like, it's a little bit terrifying. But in the case of Riverdale, I think it was such a far removed fan base, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like, there's lots of people who are the Archie comic fans, and I mean, and they go from all ranges. Like, I mean, my parents were definitely Archie comics fans, but they, but their idea of it, I mean, we were told at the very beginning of starting Riverdale that like, this is not really based on that. I mean, there certainly was, Archie with his band, and you had Josie in the Pussycats, you had like, you certainly had names, like all the names, but I kind of feel like the names sort of stayed the same, but everything else was different. I mean, there was a whole noir aspect of it. You didn't have the, necessarily specifically decades, specific, time period.
Sure.
Kind of pulled from each sort of decade, I guess, with clothes and cars. And I mean, the kids have cell phones, but yet they're driving 50s cars or 70s muscle cars, or maybe 50s cars, the whole thing. So I think that when we started seeing something, like seeing the visuals, I think that's when, like, because I'm a very visual person, which I think is understandable because I'm writing to picture. So when I read a script, there's only so much I get from a script. So, even when a title, or you read a log line, it's like, okay, this is going to be based on the Archie comics. It's like, okay, I don't really know what to make of that. Are we going to do like a 50s thing? Is it going to be like, I don't know what, but when we started seeing something and seeing how stylized it was, and what the costumes are looking like, what the characters are looking like, what even with the lighting, like all the lighting, it's very noir, it's very dark, it's, very mysterious. And then we started hearing, see like what the arch of the whole season is, and obviously having those creative conversations. That's when I think it starts to sort of lock in about like, great, it's not going to be genre specific. So the music, we want it to kind of be a timeless feel. So we thought, okay, timeless, I think one of the ways to try and do something that's timeless, I mean, and I don't know, because it's kind of in the ear of the beholder, right? But I think one of the ways is to use synths, but also, a combination of synths and live instruments. I think it's also, maybe some using instruments that you can't really recognize. You can't really recognize it as a violin. The score has evolved as well as the show has, so you can hear strings and stuff like that. But having, just kind of creating this nostalgic feel, which I feel like a lot of times, again, nostalgia isn't created in a moment. It's created over time. You can't feel nostalgic about something when it's brand new. Well, I suppose you can, but that's because you're taking your personal feelings and you're like, oh, I'm hearing that sound, or I'm smelling that aroma or something, and it's taking me back to a time that I'm attaching an emotional experience to it. So when you're starting a show, there's no emotional experience that has happened previous to, let's say, the pilot. So I think a lot of it is in the placement of the themes, the timing of the themes, when we use themes, when we refrain from using themes. key moments that we bring them back to bring our audience back to, oh, right. This is the warm fuzzy blanket that I remember about Riverdale. And this is, of course, how it's progressed. We started laying that groundwork in the pilot, but again, those things don't necessarily resonate until you get into like the second, the third, the fourth episode, and you get your fan base and they start, saying, oh, I remember that, that kind of thing. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of how we've like started, developing shows and the sound of it. And it's certainly my approach now after working with Blake for a very long time. And as I move on to projects where I'm doing them on my own or sort of what I'm being tasked on, or just say continuing on projects on my own and with this like new information, this is kind of what I think about too. It's like when you're creating these themes, certain melodies, you think about the melodies that are going to bring people back to this nostalgia of it. Obviously with the superhero shows, those melodies have a whole different task, which might be a good segue to Batwoman. I don't know, but I don't know if we've covered
that. Yes, it is, because I know you've been quoted as talking about how the music, especially when it comes to the superhero genre, can play twofold. That idea of the fantastical elements that you would have with superheroes and the amazing things that they are capable of doing, and then also the grounded capacity that you have with some characters in terms of their internal turmoil or their conflict that they are having or their traits. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, like how themes kind of have to do that, or the score. Yeah,
that duality.
Right, it's totally true, because there is this duality of, it's a superhero, so these people are either not human, or they're in a mask, like with Batwoman. They are human, but they are, they are doing very superhuman things. So the duality of being superhuman and being a hero, and then of course the human side, like with Supergirl, obviously she is not human, but she does have this human side of her, and that covers the struggle of what is good and how do you fight for good, the struggle of the sacrifices that a superhero has to make. Maybe they can't have relationships the way that humans can have them, or they can't have friendships, or they can't have a girls' night out, or something like that. It's always got to be like, oh no, this person needs saving, and sort of their quest to do the best that they can. And I think what's interesting is that it's something I never really thought about until, and I don't think anyone really thinks about it until you start to work on a show and you realize you have to like help create this kind of sonic world, or this other part of the story with the music, which is, it's not just enough to create a really heroic theme that uses open intervals to to create strength, and starts in a downbeat, or maybe starts at, or when you think about all those like compositional things, this theme, it has to be very strong. It has to like lift them up into the air and make it believable, and continue with the suspension of disbelief that this person can actually fly. But just as important as that is the human side, the emotional side. So it's just as important to have themes and melodies and parts of the score that are able to be emotional and able to follow the turns of that emotion. I keep using that word, but I don't know, for lack of a better word, that, I guess, just really be able to tug on the heartstrings, because it's not enough to just be loud and bombastic. You have to be able to like bring it back. And the shows do that. I mean, this isn't just like, oh, we just made that up. It's like the shows themselves do that. They do an amazing job. This is what's so great about Greg Berlanti and just the entire Arrowverse, and what all the writers and showrunners and have really done is they've just like, they give you that human side, because if it's too unrelatable, it's, you can't, it's unrelatable. Like you just nothing resonates with you, because you're just like, well, they're superhuman, so they don't have any problems. But it's like, oh no, they do, just like all of us, kind of thing. So yeah, so there's all those things to take into consideration when you're creating themes and scoring those shows.
And to speak further on that, like there's so many elements to discuss, like with the show, not just with how the current season ended, and talking about that and that revelation that we have at the end of the season, but also going into the new season of what you picture, or are you able to to tease some things that you know that you perhaps have planned in terms of going into season 2?
So for both Riverdale and Batwoman, I mean, I know that there are big changes. I mean, I think all of us know about Batwoman because
Sure.
Rose is being recast. So I think that that's going to, and again, we've not seen anything yet. It is still early days, and so our creative conversations are scheduled for a little bit further in the future. But we definitely have heard some things and know some things we just from our conversations from last season. So it is definitely going to be a different feel. You know, Blake and I have talked about it too. We're like, you know, what is going to be the new approach? I mean, is there going to be a new approach to Batwoman? And I think the short answer is yes and no. I mean, it's still Batwoman, you know, but it is a different character. It's not Kate Kane being Batwoman anymore. It's going to be a different character being that. So there are certain things about, you know, Kate Kane that we want to, you know, leave. You know, we send her off, so some of those things go. And but there's certain things. It's like, well, Batwoman is still the character, and it's not just because it doesn't matter who it plays. It's more like Batwoman's still the show. She's still the center of the show. She's still the hero. So we definitely plan on keeping the same theme. But we plan on developing further things to sort of speak more towards, you know, who actually is going to be not just the actress, but I mean, like, you know, the person who
the embodiment, like what that particular character embodies.
Exactly. On the villain side, we have a new villain coming. I guess we're not saying much about it yet, but they're going to be sounds and things that are very specific to where she is from. And I mean, this is what I love about this show is the villains have been so fun. I mean, this is what I love about all the superhero shows. I mean, all the comic books, you know, the villains are just as fun in some ways as the heroes. They're so like intricate and layered, and they're just, I mean, I don't know, why do we always love the villains? They're just so fun.
Hey, case in point, we have a Suicide Squad, and people are super excited. I'm super excited about Suicide Squad, that new one. So, hey, people love their villains.
People love the villains. It's part of the fun, you know. And last year, obviously, Alice, you know, being the villain, which, you know, as far as we know, she is sticking around, but she probably, you know, is probably, you know, that dynamic changes a little bit too. But Alice was just, I mean, that was probably like the favorite villain I've ever had the opportunity to write for. I'm just like, this is, I mean, everything from like her attitude to her clothes. I'm like, can I just raid her wardrobe? I just want like all of her clothes. Her sort of like Alice in Wonderland, you know, psycho chic, you know, like that's like my vibe. With Riverdale, I think we've all heard, I mean, I know it's out there because I know that the actors have been talking about it, but we do a major, massive time jump in Riverdale. We're doing like a 7-year time jump or something. So again, our creative conversations are scheduled for a couple of weeks from now, but so we're, you know, but always with Roberto, we always get at the very beginning of a season, we're like, okay, Roberto, what's the big thing? What's the big arch? You know, and obviously the first year it was like the murder mystery. Then it was like the Black Hood with the serial killer. Then it was, what was last year? Was that the serial killer? Black Hood the year before. So it was a whole thing. So this year we're not really sure what like the big mystery or the big thing is, but we do know it's a time jump, which I think is going to be really interesting because it's like, ooh, do we like mature the sound a little bit, or do we mature the sound but we still keep Riverdale, the sound of Riverdale again like a warm blanket that we're always coming back to? And that's essentially what we've done for all the seasons. Is like, you know, you address the big arc. You know, there's, you know, Hiram got a new theme. You know, the kids finally went back to school in the last season, so there were like new sort of material for the prep, Stonewall Prep. You know, there was like all kinds of new material for that, and then all that mystery that went on there. But you still have your ships themes, like, you know, your Bughead, your Varchi, that kind of thing, and you still have the Riverdale theme. It's I think those are things that we always come back to. I think you know, in the same way that the shows do, there's always something that, you know, that is comforting for the fans, and that through line that's always there. But you know, you always address the new stuff and the current stuff, but then you always got to bring it back to the warm fuzzy blankets, you know.
Cool. Well, I know you were commenting on Nancy before, and I know we've been talking extensively about everything you've done in television. However, you have done quite a bit in film as well. So I'm curious, in terms of what you use in your toolbox as a composer, what does that change going from television to film? Because in the same way, as an actor, it may change in terms of doing theater versus doing film based on that dynamic that you have with the audience and the longevity and how long that story is spanning out, and if you're doing it on a daily basis, so that type of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know what, I would say that my approach to scoring a scene does not change whether it's film or whether it's television. I think for me, the biggest differences are like, when you
The
score,
deadlines.
what's that?
The deadlines.
The deadlines. I mean, the stamina, right? The stamina is totally different. It's like you got it, like, in episodic, at least in network episodic, because I know that there's some streaming episodic where Netflix and some where they do the entire season and one thing over several months, and then you're done, and then it airs. And in network, it's like, no, it's like every week. So we have like a week to do a show, and if you have 3 shows, you have a week to do 3 shows, and then you're delivering it to the dub stage a couple of days before it airs. So there's no room for error on anyone's part. No one can miss their deadline because we all have to make it for the for the airing. But with film, obviously, much like with streaming episodic, it's not done on you have sometimes months to, sometimes only weeks, but sometimes months. So it's like it's a different kind of stamina. It's more like the marathon as opposed to like the sprint, I guess. But another really big difference too is that in a film, the arc, the entire arc, from beginning to end how the characters develop, how the story unfolds, where the pinnacle is, where the ending is, the entire spectrum and the whole journey. So you can build your score to sort of work within those confines. Okay, well, wow, that's the pinnacle, that's the big thing. So how big to go, how small to get, how emotionally deep you need to go. And in television, especially when you're first starting out, we don't know. I mean, we see one episode at a time. We might know what the arc is, but we don't know the actual character development. We don't know which friendships or romantic relationships are going to form. We don't know. I mean, oftentimes those are conversations that you have with the creators and showrunners and the writers. You say, hey, listen, just this villain is coming in. They're actually going to stick around, or they're going to come back later. So if you can plant some seeds and lay some groundwork, that's going to work. But in general, in TV, you don't know those things. So in films, it's different. So again, I don't think my approach isn't any different, but I think the themes have to be just as strong, just as solid, just as effective. And I think that I think that just kind of the way that it's, I mean, there is something in television. Sometimes we do have act outs. You have these act breaks, and so you have like the stare at the screen for like a little bit longer. Where like the music has to be like dun 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 blah. Right. And then there you go. In film, I mean, you don't really have that. So those are like very logistical differences. Like I said, my approach is the same in terms of, the strength of the characters, the strength of the themes, the use of themes, that kind of thing. And then everything else is just tailored to what the story needs and what the filmmakers are thinking, that kind of thing.
Oh, actually, we have a comment from a viewer, so let me pull it up, see if answer it. So what do you do if you're on a tight deadline and for whatever reason creativity is just not happening?
This is what I call the difference between craft and creativity. So
and thank you for the question, Dylan, by the way.
What's that?
I was saying thank you, Dylan, for the question, by the way.
Yes, thank you, Dylan. Because I mean, I can tell you felt it. Dylan's felt it. Dylan knows. Yeah, right. Like this happens all the time. You're burnout. You got nothing in the tank. But the show must go on. All this. So this is where I get. It's like, you know what? It's a little less about being creative at this point, and it's about the actual craft of what we're doing. The craft meaning, this is my skill set, this is my profession, I learned how to do this. Not, this is what I'm feeling, this is how I'm interpreting, this is how I'm emotionally connecting. That's all creativity, that's all art. And, you know, God love us when we can harness that. But really it kind of comes down to, you know what, I'm going to have to rely on, again, the skill set of like, this is what I know the scene needs. The scene needs something that connects emotionally. And so I gotta pull out my tricks. You know, like maybe you start from, maybe you just start from a different cue. Like maybe you start from something that's already there and you let that sort of, you know, move you forward. I'm not using the word inspiration because that's what we're talking about. We don't have inspiration at the moment. You know, we're just like, you know, you just don't have it, as you're saying, Dylan, like some sort of a block, you know, you just like, oh my gosh, you know, and it's terrifying. But most of the time you just have to keep like taking a step forward and figuring it out and making it work. And sometimes it's like, it's just a polished turd. Like sometimes it is just not something that you feel really good about. And that's like disheartening because none of us want to do that. Like no one wants to put their name on something that they're not proud of. But this is a job, right? It is a job. And so sometimes you just have to say, okay, you know what? This is the best I could do with what I had to work with, you know? It's not an excuse. It's, you know, I guess maybe it's an example of just something that we have to do, and this is how you get through it. But the fact of the matter is the deadlines have to be made. So you're on a tight deadline. Start from something else, you know, listen to something. I mean, I use this one carefully, but maybe you want to listen to something that has inspired you in the past. But sometimes I listen to something that I have done in the past, not because I inspire myself, but more because if I end up repeating myself, it's better than accidentally plagiarizing someone else. That's my whole thing. But yeah, start from something else. Just put something on the paper or on your computer screen. Just put something in there and take off your producer hat, your editing hat, your critic's hat, you know, take off all of those things and just free associate. Just do something. Move your fingers, move a knob, program something, hum, you know, anything. And it could be crap. But if you start from that, just keep the water moving, keep the things flowing, I guess.
Gotcha. And that's actually a segue into the next topic that I wanted to talk on, and that's just the idea of social distancing and how that has impacted everything. Obviously, unless you've been living, you know, under a rock, for those of you out there, we're all feeling it. So can you talk about that? And I know I had your friend Nathan on here previously in the prior show and talking about having a live orchestra or not having a live orchestra, how that has been impacted, but not necessarily other facets of what you do have been impacted. So can you talk to that and how that's been the last few months?
Yeah, I feel like the social distance. I mean, I think every composer has sort of said this, and now we're all kind of done laughing about it. But it is true for me. I mean, my life before social distancing was pretty much like my life after social distancing, in the sense of like, I still am in a room by myself. I still write by myself. You know, compose and that kind of thing. We've already sort of since long worked it out where, I mean, a lot of review sessions are remote anyway. You know, we send quick times. That's never ideal, but just because of everybody's schedule having nothing to do with social distancing, that's just kind of had to be the case in some ways. Certainly, you know, now we can probably, I'm lucky enough that I have a room. I can stay 6 feet apart from someone else. If I did need to have them come over, we can wear masks, we can do that. So if it was ever something like a review session, we can either stick with what we used to do with quick times, or, you know, we can actually have them I can have them in the same room. But so not much has really changed from there. But I think that something that has changed is something that you've already touched upon, and Nathan was talking about too, with like the idea of scoring something. So if you can get a compliant stage, you know, so a large enough stage that can follow all the rules of what we need to do now, and we stay within a certain small group of people, we can do it. But I don't know, it kind of feels like to me we're just going to go back to, or at least I'm going to go back to the days when I just had no budget to record. And that's when you use a soloist, or you use, you know, a couple of soloists, and or you write in a way that something can be sweetened, or soloed, so if it's like, oh, I write in a way where it's like this just, a single instrument can play over top, or you write in a way where it can maybe just be sweetened by just a couple of instruments, and those are like tricks and things that you do, as we know, when you don't have enough of a budget to record something live. You can't record a full orchestra. I think where it's going to get really weird, and we've already been discussing, is like with wind instruments, brass and winds, like flutes and clarinets and oboes and stuff like that. That I think is what's going to have to be done with like one at a time. So I think the whole style of writing is going to be a little bit different in that. But again, with, I think it's relatively easily accommodatable in our current shows, because we weren't really able to do that much scoring to begin with. I know Nathan on Prodigal Son is doing a lot of scoring, and then for some of my other projects and my future projects and some things I have coming up, I'm having to think about that, where it's just like, yeah, how am I going to do that? But like I said, I think a lot of it's going to be soloistic writing. So so having your full orchestra underneath, but then you write for a solo, which just adds that live element and can really make it pop and just really just add something to to it. And I think that maybe, some, being a little bit more conscious of, the wind instruments that I use. And if they have to be recorded live, it's just going to have to be done in a way where it's just done either one at a time, or doing what I know Nathan's done and other composers that I know have already done. I have actually not tried it yet. Either doing a situation where you just do a remote session, like, you just send it to them and they can do it. Or unfortunately, there are places that fortunately for us, there are options to record out of town. But we do have certain, if it's a union show, we can't do that. So recording out of town in places that are allowing that kind of thing are not always options, just because, again, if you work on a union show, you can't do it. But yeah, I think a lot of it has to be addressed in the writing, writing more soloistically, and then being conscious of, do we need a full brass section? And if and just I don't know, upgrading some of my samples. I hate seeing that, but I've been doing a little purchasing of better samples, sort of upgrading in that way. So
awesome. And I do want to touch on those future projects. We did have a new question from Dylan, so he did have thank you. He just wanted to discuss the strategy of breaking into scoring.
Yeah, it's a lot. I feel like it's a lot different these days than the way that I started. Like even just 10 years ago or 11 years ago now, when I first came out to LA. First of all, being in LA was like the thing you absolutely had to do. But I would say that now it's it probably still is. You can get FaceTime with people, but now with social distancing, I have no idea how that even happens. But I do think because there's so much content out there on streaming and there's so many people doing stuff, I think that makes it a little bit, I don't know if that makes it easier, but I think it gives it, it's just, there's a lot more. When you cast a net, you're probably able to like grab at least a couple of little fish. Before when you cast a net, it was like, you're coming up with like a boot or something. I'm just going to go to all this way with this like analogy. I would definitely say if you can get in touch with filmmakers personally, if you can go to, now I guess we have film festivals that are online, but a lot of those film festivals will do those Q&As. And if there's a question and answer, if you can sort of like get people's information and reach out to them and say, hey, I saw this film that you did, that, it was in this thing, compliment on their film, compliment them maybe even on the music, and maybe even say, and I would be respectful, if you go this route, I'd be respectful and maybe sort of say like, see if they had a composer on board. And if they do, maybe you can say, look, I'm sure you have a relationship with your composer and that's really great. But if there's ever a time that they're not available, or if you know of someone else, I'd love to work with you, or I loved your film, or that kind of thing, be respectful about it, because we're all working really hard, to maintain our connections. And so just to kind of go in and be like, hey, the music that you had on that thing was crap. So if you want to use a real composer, that also insults the filmmaker. So maybe don't do that. But I think, there's those kinds of things, like just kind of meeting filmmakers, also student filmmakers, like if they're already in school and they obviously have to do their student projects. Again, I don't know social distancing, but
collaborate.
Yeah, right. Collaborate and just be like, hey, I'll do your film. I'll do it for free. You will do it for free. Well, try to do it for at least like a pizza or a beer or something, like try, but they'll always be for for really, really low budget at the beginning, because everyone's just trying to cut their teeth on stuff. No one has budget, but be willing to do that, because you got to learn too. But yeah, I would say filmmakers with student films, film festivals. I think those are.
I would say, Dylan, use technology too. I mean, these days, you have a lot of artists who now have a way to be reached on an official page. So just reach out to them that way. The only thing I will say is just make sure, and gosh, I need to get off the soapbox, but make sure that you have make sure that you have a database or portfolio of something for them to possibly look at. Dylan, I would say that, because most are going to ask you that, hey, do you have something that I can listen to, so that way I can give you some advice or give you some notes. So
yeah, no, and that's so good, Brent. I was going to say that too, and thanks for bringing that up, because I was going to say also, to piggyback onto that, is that if you have your own YouTube channel, which is so easy to do, and your own SoundCloud, maybe you can just I mean, you have to be careful on YouTube, because if you sort of rescore something, you can't necessarily just broadcast, and you really want to be careful and say this was a practice assignment. The real composer is blah blah blah. Be really respectful about that, because that says something about you as a person, even if it has nothing to do about your music. And as we all know in this industry, people don't want to work with jerks. You know what I'm saying? No one wants to work with a jerk. So. But if you can get your music out there, I mean, I think that's how Michael Abels was discovered. He scored Get Out, and then I went on to score Us with Jordan Peele. So I think like, I don't know what he had put out there on YouTube. I don't know the whole story, but I know that Jordan Peele was like, found it, saw it, and was like, I love what this person has done. I'm going to contact them. And if I'm not mistaken, Michael Abels was not even really scoring film. There was just a piece of music that really resonated with Jordan Peele, and he was just like, I want this person. But it was all because Michael put his stuff out there, and as an artist. So be an artist and put yourself out there, and sometimes those some of that will come to you. I think that's one of those amazing once like lightning in a bottle kind of situations. It does take a lot of pounding the pavement and networking and doing your own thing.
But being ready again, that portfolio, being ready, being ready for it. Now, hopping into what you have coming next, are you able to tease what those projects are?
Yes, I think. Okay, so there's another show coming up, another Greg Berlanti show coming up that Blake and I are slated to do, but I don't know when it's happening. So maybe, I know, so that's not that. But I will say it's not a superhero show. It's another female-centric, badass, kicking butt kind of thing that's going to be on the CW. But we don't know when it's going to happen. So that's why I feel like I don't really know. And then I am doing an animated series for HBO Max and through Amblin that I do think, just touching upon the nostalgia that we were talking about, it's kind of another one of those that comes with an entire fan base. And I'm just like, there's a part of me that's like, oh gosh. But I'm through the vomit stage. I'm past that. Now I'm in the like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so exciting and so fun. That's not coming out until 2021, which is kind of around the corner. But because it's animation, it just takes a lot of time. But that'll be on HBO Max, and I guess I'm just not announcing the title yet, because I don't know. I always get like, I don't want to announce titles in case something happens or something. But but for all intents and purposes, COVID. I mean, COVID. Gosh, with the quarantine, it's like animation has just been able to just really like move along and blaze along. So there's been a lot of animation knocking on my door recently, which is kind of exciting. I hadn't really thought about doing animation before. But I don't know. I think I'm kind of in a place where it's like, wow, I'm always really interested to see where the work goes, because if somebody reaches out to me about, hey, I've heard some of your work and it really resonates for this project that I'm doing, and it happens to be an animation, I'm not so quick to just be like, I don't want to do that. It's more because, well, that's cool. I mean, everyone wants to be called upon to do what they do, be hired for what they do, instead of just having to be like, hey, we really wanted this person, but we couldn't afford them. So can you just do that? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, that happens, and that's cool, because you just want to get called sometimes. But it's pretty great when somebody says, I know the work that you've done, or I've heard your reel, or I've heard these things of yours, and they really resonate with that project, and I really, think you should do this. So So I don't know. There's two big things coming up. Both also, like I said, two. I've already said them, but they're both episodic. But one is animation and one is live action. So that's really cool. And then who knows? Who knows? The world is a big place.
All right, awesome stuff. Well, Sherri, thank you so much for coming on. It's always good to see you. As I told the rest of the gang, I miss you and everybody else. Hopefully we can reconnect come next year. But before I let you go, can you tell folks where they can find you?
Yes. Facebook, I think it's the Sherri Chung, which sounds totally like egotistical, and I was never trying to do that. But you know when you make your profile thing, like, you know, a long time ago, it's the Sherri Chung because apparently there's an imposter out there. And then Instagram is Sherri Chung, and then Twitter is Sherri_Chung. I think. I don't know. One of those. I'm so bad at the socials, but SoundCloud website, sherrichung.com. So, you know, but yeah. But thank you so much, Brandon, for having me on. This was super fun. I'm talking about nostalgia. I'm reliving our days of Comic-Con and just owning the town. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Indeed. So again, thanks for you, those of you that were watching. Again, I'm your host, Brandon Choi, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. You can find us on Facebook, which you're watching now. However, you can find us on Instagram at Movers Shakers Unlimited. You can find us on Twitter at Move and Shake UNLTD. You can find me, Brandon Choi, ENT on Twitter. And then, of course, Instagram, Brandon Choi _ENT. Again, thanks for watching. Be safe out there. See you soon. Bye.